It seems to me that we do not think our stories matter. And when I say stories, I mean our successes as well as our failures, the celebrations we may want to post on social media, or the deep, dark secrets that we don't want to tell anyone. It seems to me that we don't think our stories matter. It seems to me that we do not think they are important enough to share. It seems to me like we do not believe our stories have the power to bring transformation to other people's lives and to change the lives of the people around us and the community around us. And so I wonder if this woman who is coming to the well all by herself thinks that her story matters. She doesn't tell it to Jesus. We hear her story because Jesus tells it to her. Talks about the 5 husbands that she has had. And probably because each of them has died, and in that time a widow didn't really have a lot of standing, and so sometimes a brother would marry that widow, and so her story is probably one of great sadness and tragedy as husband after husband has died, and she has had to move from place to place, and now she's got a guy that won't marry her. Maybe she feels like a burden and just keeps getting kind of handed down to the next person that has to care for her. And so she comes to this well, probably with grief and with sadness as part of her story. And I wonder if she thinks that story matters. I wonder what it was like when she walked around town. Did they look at her, oh, there's the lady that had 5 husbands. And she comes then to the well all by herself, alone. And then she enters into this amazing conversation with Jesus. Last week we heard Nicodemus come to Jesus by night and has an equally sort of puzzling conversation for him about spirit and water and being born from above, and Nicodemus never gets it. But in this story with this woman at the well, she sort of makes this progression. It starts with Jesus talking about living water, and she's trying to figure out how there's living water in this well, and how do you get that out? But then Jesus kind of keeps talking, and then she starts to say, well, wait a minute. We have a common ancestor in Jacob. The Samaritans were a group of people that had come from Jews that had intermarried. And so they all sort of still kind of look to that same Messiah coming and the same ancestry. So she starts to connect Jacob and Jesus, and she starts to talk about worship, and that the Samaritans worshipped on the mountain, but the Jews would prefer worship in the temple. And so she takes it into this place of faithfulness. And then Jesus talks some more, and then she's the one that talks about the Messiah. So as he is talking about living water and God being spirit, she connects it to the Messiah, to the one that is to come to save the world. And Jesus says, yep, that's me. And then off she goes. And then as she gets to the town, when she goes back, the people believe her. They listen to her and they believe her, and they come to see Jesus and invite him to stick around for a while. And the last bit of the passage tells us, we believed you, but now we believe because we heard it for ourselves. And I, for one, find this part of the story amazing, that they listened to her and believed her. Now that amazement could get set alongside the resurrection, where the first witnesses of the resurrection were who? The women. And at that point in time, women could not be witnesses in legal proceedings, right? So to believe a woman, it's amazing that the witnesses of the resurrection are women. But that's not why this amazes me in the story of John. It amazes me that they listened to her because some 2,000 years later, we still don't listen to women. I'm going to keep going here, but after the first service, a group of men asked if they could have a rebuttal next week. But we do not listen to women. You can look at some very serious things like sexual assaults. We blame victims, we talk about the way they dressed or the way they acted, and then we say that it's he said, she said. Notice he is the first thing we say. He said, she said, not the other way around. And so we don't believe, and it's no wonder then that women don't come forward when they experience these things, because they wonder if they will be believed. I don't think I'm on sketchy territory to suggest that every woman and girl in here, whether it's at work or school or church someplace else, has at some point shared an idea or a thought or a solution to a problem that just was completely ignored until a male said it, and everybody said, well, that's a good idea, right? We should think about that and consider that. We don't listen to women. We have a newly elected state's attorney for our county here, and she's been in a process, as I understand it, for a good while of studying the death penalty and the costs of it and the inequitable way in which it is applied, which has deep ties into racism and other things in our culture. And after some long consideration, she was going to announce that she was not going to seek the death penalty in her time in office. And that kind of came out in a different way, and there was a press conference this week and all the rest of that. And the governor has taken that case away from her for an officer that was killed and given it to a different state's attorney. But underneath a lot of this, you have a woman who is qualified, who was elected to do a job and has done the discerning thing that she felt best for the people that elected her. And when she stood up and said, I've studied all this, and I don't think it's the best thing for us, she wasn't believed, right? Because we don't believe women. So in this story where this woman goes out and meets Jesus and comes back, and all of a sudden gets the whole town fired up, and they all then come out and invite Jesus to stick around, it's amazing to me that they believed her. So it's worth looking into the story and say, well, why did they believe her? What was it that she came back and brought with her that allowed those people to believe her and come along? And if you think about her story, she doesn't tell it to Jesus, and when she goes back, she doesn't even tell it to the people. She just says, he told me everything about me. Well, you gather that maybe it was a smaller community and they all kind of knew her story anyway. So she comes back not just with her story of tragedy and pain and grief, but she's had this encounter with Jesus, who then sends her back with a different thing. In this encounter, he talks about eternal life. He talks about this bubbling up in her. What he's really talking about probably is resurrection, even though he hasn't been resurrected yet. And so he takes this woman who is alone and has a tragic story, and he couples it with new life of resurrection. He turns her into a witness of the resurrection, which is what the church is post-resurrection, post-Easter. We are witnesses of the resurrection. So in this story that we're not even to the resurrection yet, Jesus takes this woman and takes her story and sees her and knows her and has a conversation with her, and then adds new life into the mix and sends her back. So when she comes back to town, she's not just the tragic story that she had. She also comes now with grace and with new life and with a resurrection sort of mindset where she can come back and say, could this be the Messiah? Maybe. And the people go, well, let's go check it out. Because she was probably so fired up with this new life that she had had from this encounter with Jesus. And this is what Jesus does. All of us have stories, and I wonder if we think they matter. They certainly matter to us. And they matter to the people around us, but I don't know that we think they matter to other people. And it's in sharing her story with other people that she draws all these people out. But if you look at what Jesus does on the cross and in the resurrection, he tells us that death is not the final answer. If she does not encounter Jesus, she may be as defined as the woman that had 5 husbands and all this terrible life. But Jesus comes along and takes that story and adds new life to it, and she no longer is defined in that way. And this is what happens on the cross and the resurrection. It means that our worst mistake is not the last word about it. It means that our biggest failures or our biggest griefs are not the end of the story. It means that even the struggle and the finality that we come to in death is not the end. Without the resurrection, all of that does define us and is the end. But with the resurrection, it's not, because with the resurrection, Jesus promises to bring us into new life. When he talks about living water and God being of spirit, he's talking about the new life that he comes to bring us. And when you couple that with the brokenness of our stories, it becomes a powerful thing that we can share. And there's a couple of things I think that we can learn from this story. One is that we ought to listen to women more. In particular, women who have had a rough way through life. Whether they are refugee women that are dragging their kids along with them, single moms that are struggling to just get food on the table every day and keep a job that has no vacation and all the rest of that, women that are struggling with the loss of children, just all kinds of ways. We ought to listen more to women. And if we do, we just might find that God is running all around this world bringing resurrection into it. If we listen to those stories and really listen, we might find that yes, there is tragedy there, but there is also hope. And there is newness, and there is grace that has come alive. And what happens when we hear stories like that? A whole town of people came out to meet Jesus when they heard one. Because it's powerful, it changes us when we listen to those stories and when we hear them. So the first thing I think we can learn is that we ought to listen to the stories of women. Next thing I think we can learn that comes from the disciples in this story. They also went to the city, and what did they bring back? Food. They went and got dinner. Jesus gives them a whole lecture about their job is to go reap what has been sowed, and that the harvest is ready. There was a whole city of people waiting to hear a new good news word, and they came out once they heard it. And the disciples who have been trained to do that very thing went and they came back with dinner. Sometimes we as the church get comfortable We don't think our stories are worth sharing or important or have transformative power. So we gather in this place and we go back out into the world without a good word, without a sense of the fact that we are witnesses of the resurrection. We don't go look for it and talk about it and share it when we see it. Just like the disciples went and got dinner. Now eventually they get it. After the resurrection they go and they become these amazing witnesses to what they had seen. But they haven't seen it yet. And so they just go get dinner. But she sees it, and it's in seeing it then and having that alongside her tragedy that she tells that story. So the second thing I think we can learn is that we ought to share our stories. And it's not one of those things where you just walk out and tell everybody your deepest, darkest secrets all the time, because sometimes that's just not the right time. But it's about discerning and understanding that we each do have a story. Each of us does have struggles and darkness and brokenness that we carry with us. And when you marry that up with the goodness and the grace that has come into that darkness, we have powerful things that can shape the lives of other people. In our Wednesday Lenten services, we have men and women sharing their stories. And they are stories that are heavy. We've heard about divorce. We've heard about depression and substance abuse. We've heard about what happens after war. We will hear more about children that die, and death, and resurrection, and struggles of faithfulness, and whether we have to earn ourselves God's love or it comes to us. These are amazing stories that we're hearing on Wednesday nights. And they're amazing because they are the same thing the woman at the well has. It is the brokenness and the darkness coupled with the grace and the forgiveness and the new life that Jesus gives us. And when we can understand that power of the gift of the resurrection that we have and we take that out into the world, it will transform people's lives. Some of you are probably sitting here because someone shared their story of brokenness alongside their story of grace. And it is a hard thing sometimes to share that. The woman at the well, it's probably pretty obvious, right? They all know her story, so when she just talks about the grace that comes along, they go, oh, okay. But not everybody knows our darkness. We middle-class, relatively affluent Americans keep that stuff packed up pretty tight. And it's a vulnerable thing to have to share that. As a pastor, I know this when we're in these seasons and I ask people to share their stories. I know I'm asking them to do something risky and vulnerable, to throw out to the space here for people to hear about that darkness. But then when they talk about the grace, it is so much more powerful because it is that grace that comes into that darkness that makes that story what it is. And it is that witnessing of the resurrection that we do. At the end of the story, you hear that this whole town came because they heard what she said, but then they heard it for themselves. And when they heard it for themselves, they were transformed. May we be blessed to go out of this place and trust that our stories do matter. They are important. They can transform people's lives when we share the fullness of them, both the difficulty of it, but also the resurrection that we have experienced. And people may just believe us at first, but then eventually Jesus will come to them in a way that they can experience themselves, and then their story will take on new meaning that they can share with others. And that love of God that we talked about with the kids up here, that is for each and every one of us, will continue to spread through the stories that we share. And when we share those stories, it comes back to us in the same way. She was a new person. She was no longer just that woman that had brokenness. She now is a woman that converted a whole city of people to come meet this person of Jesus. And we have that same power because Jesus gives it to us in the resurrection. May we be blessed to experience that as we go out from this place. Amen.